And one of the things that we're discovering as time goes on is that, you know, I've made reference to the Trump crime family in the past. And increasingly, it's looking like that's not just some kind of weird slogan. Heather Vogell is with us. She's a reporter with ProPublica. Previously was a reporter with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, which when Louise and I lived in Atlanta, we used to read regularly, a great newspaper. ProPublica.org is the website, and her Twitter handle is hvogell, V-O-G-E-L-L. Heather, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me on.
I regularly read ProPublica's app, actually, you know, and I came across these articles that you wrote. I'm not sure if you wrote both of them. One of them was kind of a deep dive into how Ivanka and her brother Don and particularly Donald Trump were basically scamming people, lying to investors and ripping them off and walking away with the money. And then another one was a list of all the projects where they pulled this off. Can you tell us about this?
Basically, we took a really deep look at one of their real estate deals, but we also took kind of a quicker look across a dozen deals that the Trump organization has been involved in over the last, about 14 years or so. And what we found was a pattern of deceptive practices is sort of stretched across those projects, across countries, across time. And we found, there were two primary elements to it that involved the Trumps very directly. And do you want me to just
Sure.
go ahead
and
tell you? Okay,
yeah, please.
Great. So the first was in these projects, Trump is brought in. He's a licensor, so he's really putting his name on the project. But he typically, in most of these cases, had no equity or no stake in the development, and he wasn't the developer.
In other words, he puts no money into it. Just
exactly,
right.
Exactly. He wasn't. He had very little risk, basically. But he would go out and say things that were suggestive that would lead people to think that he was either the developer or that he had a financial stake in the project, had invested his own money in it. And this happened repeatedly. Many projects, from Panama to statements Ivanka made in Baja. There was a Tampa project where he said he had put a substantial stake in. He wanted to increase it, but units were selling so great that he couldn't. And the problem with those types of statements are that buyers are using them to evaluate how safe and solid the investment is and how much of a risk they'd be taking by investing. And when they see someone like him, who claims to be sort of a financial real estate guru, out there suggesting that he's put his own money in it, that leads to sort of a false confidence. It leads them to, sort of throw their money in too, when in fact he did not really have.
Isn't that fraud on his part?
Well, I can't say that. It's a good question. It was one of the questions that we raised, certainly. And we talked to one former federal prosecutor who said that some of the deceptive practices we were describing did resemble elements of fraud cases that he'd seen prosecuted and investigated. So that question's out there. There was a case in Soho where there was a criminal investigation. There were prosecutors here that wanted to make a case against the Trumps. One of the statements they made was that they were the developer. Another very common misstatement they made was to inflate the number of sales that had already been made. And remember, these are new buildings, and so people are kind of making commitments. They're putting their down payment down even before the unit's been built yet. So it's more risky than sort of, buying into a building that's already there. And so the Trumps, would go out in a number of cases and say things like, Ivanka would say in Soho, we're 60% sold when, documents showed later that really it was only 15%. In Panama, she said they were more than 90% sold at one point. And it was at a critical point when the ratings agency, right around when the ratings agency was considering a downgrade, which they did a couple months later. But she said they were over 90% sold, and in fact, it was 79% at best, and a lot of those buyers ended up walking away. So these are very sort of specific statements that they made that were demonstrably false in a number of cases.
Wow. So we basically have a grifter as president and a grifter in his daughter as the one of his principal advisors. And her husband, his father, went to jail for being a grifter in this sort of thing, in investment scams. What do we do with this?
I think it's one of these things where these projects are, they're spread out over time, they're spread out over jurisdictions. Buyers have filed a lot of lawsuits. A lot of those have settled. There's been a couple of cases where Trump has won. They were cases, my understanding is they were cases where a judge looked at the contract and found that the actual sales contract had all the necessary disclosures and did not, make a finding in favor of the buyers. They've gone through the civil route in a lot of places. There were considerations of criminal charges in Soho. Some of the behavior may be outside the statute of limitations at this point. It's really an open question about whether anything happens from here. But certainly a lot of people were hurt in these deals because so many of them went belly up.
And when they went belly up, what happened to the Trumps?
Well, that's what's interesting about it. And that's actually what drew me to the story was I was taking a look at his real estate deals, the more recent ones, and what I was really struck by how many of them failed, bankrupt, foreclosed, never built, started, construction wasn't finished. And it just raised this question to me about why is he doing this over and over? And also, why are people partnering with him? Because he's got a number of different partners in these deals. What I found out was that his licensing agreements provide often a pretty sizable upfront fee, and then some of it is predicated on the percentage of sales and things like that. But we found clauses like one in Panama where even for unsold units, he would still get paid, even if units weren't sold by a certain time. He would get paid per unit, even for the unsold units. So. There was a lot of money that he could get without the project having to perform very successfully.
So he cuts a deal with a local developer to build a Trump building. He charges them a whole bunch of upfront money, millions and millions of dollars for use of his name. He promotes the deal. People put money into it. And a piece of that money is instantly skimmed off the top and given to Trump as his licensing fee or as his fee for that. And then the thing goes belly up. It declares bankruptcy. There's no way to claw that money back from Donald Trump. So him and Ivanka walk away with the money, and the investors are stuck with with the bankruptcy, getting pennies on the dollar. Is that my understanding of what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, he.
Is that right?
Yes, mostly. When the project went bankrupt in Panama in 2013, he did shave his fees by $20 million. But from our estimate, he still received $30 to $55 million on that project. And what's, to me, one of the more striking things about that project, to me, was that it was financed with a corporate bond. So people bought bonds in order to, is basically sort of a way of lending their money to the project. $220 million in bonds were sold. Now, eventually, on that principle, only $120 million. There was $120 million that was not ultimately paid back, is what one investor told me. But he again still made between 30 and 55 million from what we can figure out.
That's amazing.
There were interest payments too, so they didn't.
Heather, we're going to hit a break here in a second, but
okay.
the one thing that it just blows my mind that the Republicans held years and years of congressional hearings and lots of hyperventilation that Hillary Clinton was talking on an insecure server in her personal email from home, which never was even hacked. And they have nothing to say about the fact that Donald Trump is using an unsecure iPhone in the White House over the loud objections of everybody from the Secret Service to the NSA, doing something far worse. Similarly, the Whitewater was a land deal that Bill Clinton invested in back before he was governor of Arkansas, where he and Hillary lost $35,000. It went down in flames, just like so many of Trump's hotels. And the Republicans pursued him on this for years. For 6 or 7 years until they finally found Monica. And Trump is doing far worse in case after case after case. Where are the Democrats on this?
I didn't examine that political element of the story at that point, but we tried to contact. We contacted the White House. We contacted Trump Organization. We gave them, a very lengthy list of questions, sort of detailing all of this, line by line, what we found, and gave them a chance to respond. And we never heard back.
That is absolutely remarkable. Heather, you're doing great reporting. Heather Vogell with ProPublica.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for coming on the program and for doing this important writing. I strongly recommend anybody who's listening or watching the program right now go over to ProPublica.org and you can read that. And you can tweet Heather at @Vogell, Vogell. Heather, thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. All right, take care.
Nice meeting you. We'll be back.